What's up, everyone? It's the Autistic Scyther here, and, well, surprisingly enough, I've mentioned, as you already know, I love Fire Emblem a lot. It's been one of my autistic special interests, alongside Pokemon, for as long as I could remember. And when it comes down to it, I've mentioned a lot about my favorite. It's in Fire Emblem, from my favorite classes, to my favorite characters from Awakening and Birthright, and even my favorite arts from favorite and least favorite arts from Fire Emblem Heroes. That being said, if you're wondering what my favorite games are, well, this list is for you, because honestly, I have to mention about my favorite Fire Emblem games. And yeah, while I kind of have a different opinion than others, honestly, I still respect everyone else's opinion. It's basically what makes the Fire Emblem fandom is full of a lot of people who like different games, and that's pretty cool when you think about it. So basically, this is my way of throwing my hat into that ring. So, that being said, it's time to count down my top 10 favorite Fire Emblem games. In this case, I'm basically counting down my 10 favorite Fire Emblem entries out of the games I've played. Granted, I haven't played through many of these games fully, but in all fairness, this is depending on what I've played. And surprisingly enough, if you're wondering, there's no Tokyo Mirage Sessions, Warriors, Three Hopes, or Shadows on this list, since I have played none of those four. Literally, they are the only games I have not played. And it's weird when you realize I really want to. So, with that being said, let's get started. Starting off first at number 10, we have Fire Emblem Engage. Yeah, what better way to start off a list of my top 10 favorite Fire Emblem games than the most recent entries. And no, not Fire Emblem Shadows. Seriously. As I mentioned, I have not played Fire Emblem Shadows as of yet. But I'm talking about Fire Emblem Engage. I mean, in fairness, when it comes down to it, it's one of the few games that I really enjoyed and was looking forward to from the start. Ever since the first time seeing the trailer from the start and seeing all of the characters basically showing up and fighting, I was wowed, to say the least. And all of them and granted, many of them I kinda didn't know much about from the start, likes of characters like Alfred, Tamara, Diamond, or Ivy. I didn't know from the start because it was that first trailer. But as time went on and I learned about the game, I kind of liked it, to the point that I eventually bought it. Granted, it was a bit later than its actual release date, but in all fairness, it was better late than never, because I was enjoying every bit of the game. And keep in mind, this is a nice little love letter to Fire Emblem to every Fire Emblem game prior to this point, which really does say a lot. Also, and the fact that every one of the characters from the past main lords of sorts were basically emblems in the game really does say a lot. I mean, it does bring up some interesting questions, like why Celica as the emblem of echoes over Alm? I do not know. And heck, even Sigurd being the emblem of genealogy over Seliph, considering how we play as Seliph for most of genealogy, was even questionable. But even with that, there's still amazing moments that really kind of that you really kind of expect. I mean, Lucina being the emblem of awakening over her father makes sense when you realize she does come back from the past, from a ruined future to the past to basically try and rectify it. And even Lyn as the emblem of blazing makes sense when you consider that Lyn mode was the very first part of Blazing Sword that we know of. And then there's Fates in Three Houses as emblem rings, which, while I do get that the fact that Corrin and Byleth were the emblems for Fates in Three Houses, Azura, and the fact that Azura didn't get, and I know the house leaders ended up getting into the game later on with the DLC, but the fact that Azura got the shaft, no pun intended, may be a little disappointing. Especially when you realize that they had a good chance to add her into the DLC, but they decided to add in Camilla. And yeah, it's been said that it was for her flying mechanic. I don't buy it. That being said, even though I've played it twice, and again, I am hoping to play through it a third time, doing like a 4-way Nuzlocke style challenge alongside Leaf Green, Black 2, and Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon, it's gonna be one I'm gonna enjoy. Just, you're not gonna see me getting the DLC anytime soon. I am not touching that DLC with a 10-foot pole. I am sorry about that. Moving on next at number 9, we have Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War. Yeah. Alright. Most of these games are kind of interesting. But if you already hadn't guessed, most of these games I've played through are, through means of emulation on my phone. Which is kind of contentious when you think about it, but in certain aspects, it has to be done because in certain ways, there's no way to actually get it on actual hardware. And you would think I would be able to play through Genealogy just naturally if it was on the Switch Online servers for the SNES, but no, it's not. I wish it was, but it's relegated to Japan. So the only way to do it would be to emulate it. And I did, both on my phone and on my family's computer. And I loved every moment of it. Granted, the fact that, again, when you think about it, the fact that Sigurd is the emblem of genealogy and Engage is weird, considering how we do get to, play as Seliph through most of the game, thanks to a certain barbecue. But that being said, it's kind of nice to see where Fire Emblem's where Sigurd basically got a start. And honestly, the fact that I've played through the good amount I've played through Genealogy, the most I played through Genealogy, allowed me to get a new love for many of the characters from this title. I mean, heck, even though I didn't get a chance to control her, to recruit her into my army and utilize her to the fullest, I still have a fair amount of respect and love for Tiltu as one of my favorites, due to her just being spunky and just spunky and full of sass. I mean, heck, who else calls the Valkyrie staff a dirty old stick or a grubby old cane? I could see why they actually decided to use that for May in Fire Emblem Echoes, because Tiltu did it first. Also, the fact that they both use lightning magic is not lost on me. But even with that, many of the other characters also have some interesting personalities I really love. I mean, Azel is the younger brother of Arvis, and he's just an actual doggedly nice guy. Lex is kind of an awesome dude, bro. Aira is a badass sword master, the likes of Rutger or Navarre, or even arguably not someone like Joshua or Zehark, would have ever demonstrated. And even putting the boys on a run for their money, Do is an awesome way to gain additional amounts of money, even though he's still kind of frail as the dickens. No joke. Just keep Do out of fighting range. And then Lewin's kind of just your standard vagabond, but he's kind of he's the precursor to Joshua, a prince of a kingdom who decided to go off on his own and strike out as a sort of mercenary of sorts. And it's kind of enjoyable. And then there are a lot of other characters that come to mind. As again, and the likes of characters like Ethlin, Edane, and Lachesis kind of become enjoyable, especially as the Osawa manga shows. Seriously, Gremlin Ethlin is best Ethlin. And even characters like Bridget and Finn I tend to have a lot more respect for, especially considering the fact that they reappear in Thracia 776. And even the second generation really has their own sort of standouts, with the likes of Seliph, Larce, Lana, Tinny. I was about to say Tiltu again. Why the heck was I about to do that? Ares, Lean, Lelia, Kuiper, I believe. Either Kuiper or Charlo, depending. Nana, Leaf, Julia. Just a lot of amazing characters. I mean, even Oife and Shannon I tend to essentially like, and we see them growing up through the game. The fact of the matter is, it's a really fun game, but it's really long. And I don't mean long as in amount of time. I mean long as in the length of the maps. Yeah. I'd find myself playing a little bit of it and getting each map and getting tired and having to save it at that point because it's so long. Oh boy. Honestly, I wish Genealogy got a remake. Because at least maybe then they might condense those maps down a little. Or at least kind of make it fun. Who knows? Moving on next at number 8, we have Fire Emblem The Binding Blade. Oh boy. FE6. What can I say about this game? Well, what can I say about this game that hasn't been said? Well, it's basically a crime that we in the West have not gotten this game on the Nintendo Switch Online service for the GBA at all, and it's been still stuck in Japan, being sold in Japan, which I get with Mother 3, but come on. Blazing Sword was the first time many of us here in the West were introduced to Fire Emblem. I mean, Nintendo could have at least given us Binding Blade. Alright, all that aside, Binding Blade is a really enjoying game. And it has a really enjoying story. In fact, I've been possibly finding ways to randomize Binding Blade myself, which for what it's worth is kind of hard to do. But it's funny to say the least because it's a fun title. And yeah, a lot of the characters in Binding Blade, the fact that it's kind of a sequel to Blazing Sword, even though it came out before the game, really kind of says a lot, as many of the characters are basically, because you're controlling the second generation of many of the characters from Blazing Sword. And when I played through Binding Blade on my phone, I was not expecting a lot of the characters to be so different than their parents, to the point that I was kind of in disbelief when it was. I mean, for example, you have Walt, who is basically the son of Rebecca, one of my favorite archers from Fire Emblem as a whole. Well, besides the likes of characters like Takumi, Bernadetta, and Alchrist. And basically, he's more or less Roy's best friend and sworn milk brother. Especially ever since they were kids. Being kind of one of the first ever retainers who was chosen as a retainer because they were their lord's best friend. Again, something that has been done later on with other retainers. Think Takumi and Hinata, or Elise, or both Elise, or Sakura and Hana, or Elise and Effie, and maybe Arthur, or heck, even arguably enough, Saline and Chloe. Also, one could also say Alfred and Etienne, if it wasn't the fact that Saline and Etienne are the childhood friends in this situation. And heck, the same thing can be said for many of the other second generation kids. Like Clarine and Klein being the kids of Pent and Louise, which while it's understandable with Klein due to the fact that Louise was pregnant with him during the events of Blazing Sword, but Clarine being their daughter is kind of it kind of made me lift up an eyebrow when you think about it. And heck, even while Sue is the daughter of Wrath, it's even more noticeable once you realize that she could easily also be the daughter of Lynn, which really says a lot since Sue is basically reserved. And as we've seen in Blazing Sword, Lynn has a tendency to speak her mind, especially when it comes to the subject of pirates. But even with that, the non-second generation characters are standouts in themselves as well. Kath is an interesting character due to just being your standard thief archetype who just shows up out of nowhere. There is a hope of stealing treasure, only to run into Roy each time, and then just be like, "You know what? I'm a bounce." And each time, until the final time when you eventually recruit her. And then whereas with the likes of Gonzalez, whereas you have the likes of characters like Gonzalez and Laram, who are both interesting in their own way. Gonzalez being the first ever playable brigand, and while he's basically a big old brute, he's also kind of a sweetheart when you think about it. And Laram is she's basically your standout head empty ditz. And it's enjoyable to say the least. The reason why I haven't finished playing through Binding Blade is Arcadia. Yeah, I know it's not worth saying, but yeah, I can see why a lot of people dislike Arcadia. And honestly, it's reinforced my hatred of desert levels to a full degree. I dislike desert levels. And Arcadia is the reason why. Moving on next at number 7, we have Fire Emblem Sacred Stones. Yeah. If Binding Blade is, one of the only GBA games we never got, GBA Fire Emblem games we never got, then Sacred Stones is one of the most interesting GBA games we've ever gotten. And this is saying a lot considering that Fire Emblem is believed to be one of the easiest games in the entire franchise. And in all fairness, it kind of is true. Considering how Blazing Sword was the first time we were introduced to Fire Emblem as a whole, yeah, Sacred Stones was a nice, interesting palate cleanser. And says a lot once you realize it was however, it has its own quirks, as it gave us a lot of things that we kind of take for granted now more than ever, as it introduced so many amazing things, including the overworld level, as well as including the overworld level and skirmishes, including the overworld map, skirmishes, which are used to grind up many of your different units, trainee classes and trainee units in Ross, Amelia, and Ewan. All three of them are very solid units, to say the least. and units I will find myself using more than once. A branching path, which is, well, while we do see that in the likes of Fates, and Three Houses, Sacred Stones really has an amazing way of, amazing sort of branching pathway. I mean, the fact that I'm playing through Sacred Stones in order to play through the Ephraim route is proof of that. And even when you think about it, branching promotion classes, yeah. Honestly, well, Awakening was kind of my second or third Fire Emblem game I was introduced to. Second was Sacred Stones. It was Sacred Stones that the reason why I like the branching pathways, or branching promotion pathways, was because of Sacred Stones. I mean, heck, it was my first introduction to skills, and I really enjoyed them, to say the least. Plus, I've played through the entirety of Sacred Stones several times, and I've enjoyed it. And even when I played through it on the Nintendo Switch Online system, the fact that I enjoyed the latter half of the story for the first time, I gotta say, I was blown away and enjoying every second of it. I mean, I even ended up facing off against Fort Mortis using the likes of Erica, Ephraim, Joshua, Natasha, Lute, Artur, Nami, Larachelle, and Cormag, to name a few. I mean, heck, even Ross and Amelia I used. And Inez. So, yeah. I found myself using strategies I never thought I would use, and enjoying every moment of it. And I don't think I'd ever... And while there also might be a chance this might get remade in the near future, I don't think I'd ever see it as superior to the original. That much is true. Right. Moving on, next at number 6, we have Fire Emblem Heroes. Yeah. I still play Fire Emblem Heroes to this day. I mean, a sentiment that you've noticed from me by the fact that I have videos talking about my favorite Fire Emblem Heroes arts and my least favorite Fire Emblem Heroes arts. So yeah, it says a lot once you realize some of them are kind of my favorites. And even with that, I still play Fire Emblem Heroes, even though I haven't gotten into Book 10 as of yet. I am still in Book 9, and I've still been going back and forth with Heroes sporadically. In all fairness, that's because of the power creep. But even with that, I'm still watching the many different banner announcements for Fire Emblem Heroes and seeing what new heroes will get into the game. And I've been and I've enjoyed every minute of it. Which really does say a lot. I mean, heck, even with that, the fact that I've been able to utilize teams of some of my favorite units from the past, from many of the different main series Heroes games, it really says a lot. I mean, heck, where else could I have a team of Claude, Tinny, Ophelia, and Claude, Tinny, Valoria, and Aboro fighting together? Or even the likes of Ash, as an Ash Hubert, again, kind of hard to differentiate between him and Ash Ketchum. Saline. Oh, dang, who was that? Yeah. Or heck, even a team of Ash Hubert, Saline, Maria, and... Dang, who was that other one? Oh, I am blanking. Oh, and Felicia. I mean, heck, there was... I even have a team consisting of Caspar, Bernadetta, Alchrist, and Lapis. Mainly because I ship both Caspar and Bernadetta and Alchrist and Lapis together. And I even had a team consisting of Sakura, Hana, Dorothea, and Fjorm. So, yeah. And it's kind of a perfect way to imagine just what the interactions between many different characters would be like. I mean, heck, I keep in mind, I read a lot of Fire Emblem fan fictions. And the fact that I've seen so many Skippy's List fanfics for Heroes really does say, it really has gotten the kind of headcanon and writing bug going for me. And that's even saying a lot once you realize that Heroes has a lot of iconic OCs that I really enjoy. And yeah, there might be a good chance I might do an entire list of Fire Emblem Heroes OCs, but my favorite Fire Emblem Heroes OCs. But in all fairness, let's just take it with a grain of salt that I like all of them. Except Dick Vernier. Yeah. Honestly, if I don't see another alt of the Buff Deer Man, I would be happy. But even with that, yeah, Heroes is still amazing even after all this time. That I'm saying that, and Power Creep is basically just kicking my booty up and down the street. Yeah. Moving on next at number 5, we have Fire Emblem 3 Houses. Yup. The one that gave us an entire 5 years of discourse. And with the advent of Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave, we may get some more discourse from it. But even while saying that, Three Houses is still is still an amazing game for me. I mean, the fact that it's number 5 is kind of middle of the road. But keep in mind, I played through that game 10 times. And I used the Ashen Wolves 2 of those 10 times. Yeah, it took me some time until last year that I got the Cindered Shadows DLC for 3 Houses. And while it was kinda interesting to say the least, Oh my god, it was a ball buster. But it was fun. And heck, each time on my playthroughs, each time I played through 3 houses, I learned something new about myself and even learned different strategies that I made use of. Different ways of playing through the game, using specific units to their advantage, to their strengths and advantages. I mean, who would have expected that Ingrid as a bow using Pegasus Knight would have been a solid investment? Yeah. I used Ingrid as a bow using Pegasus Knight. And that's not the only wild or weird thing I did. Because I made Caspar a war monk and Marianne a trickster. And they both did gangbusters. Just... holy crap, I was not expecting. But if you already hadn't guessed, yeah, it's worth for me just enjoying specific characters as they are. And even with that, as much as a certain game later on down the list, some of my favorite characters are from 3 houses. I mean, you had the 3 house leaders. You have the likes of Caspar, Ferdinand, Bernadetta, Dorothea, Hubert, to a lesser extent, Sylvain, Felix, Ash Hubert. Again, hard to differentiate him from Ash Ketchum. Ingrid, Mercedes, Annette, who is just the most adorable little cinnamon roll in the game, who, as I've said so many times, needs a hug and a Happy Meal. Seriously, I had to say that. And there's also the likes of Marianne, who, again, I didn't think much of, but I eventually came to love as one of my favorites because she is just so precious. She is just so adorable, and I love how she goes from being almost clinically depressed to this at the beginning, but as soon as the time skip hits, you start to see her coming out of her shell and becoming a lot more open because you showed her the kindness is that she felt like she hadn't been given. Plus, again, Sylvain, her support with Sylvain is just hilarious. Especially the bee support where she just looks like she is coked out of her mind while saying the word cheese. It's just hilarious. And surprisingly enough, even characters like Lysithea and Cyril tend to be some of my favorites, even though they've had some form of interesting mixed opinions within the fandoms. And arguably me as a whole, especially Lysithea. And keep in mind, I am currently playing through Dragon Quest XI's for the Switch. And I've had some interesting, hard to swallow opinions about Veronica. To the point that she kind of reminded me of Lysithea. And it brought up a lot of opinions that yeah, came flooding back. But even with that, Three Houses is one of those games I've played so much. And honestly, I want to play this game. I want to play this game again. Just not 10 times in a row or 4 times in a row. Seriously. Never again. Moving on next at number 4, we have Fire Emblem Path of Radiance. Yeah, surprisingly enough, one of the GameCube... Yeah, surprisingly enough, I have not... If you were wondering where the GameCube Fire Emblem entry was, well, here it is. And surprisingly enough, Path of Radiance is one of my most iconic entries. And it's funny to say the least. It's funny to say the least, especially with the fact that the only time I've been able to play through Path of Radiance is again emulated on my phone. And that's not for nothing, because Fire Emblem Path of Radiance is now on the Nintendo Switch Online service. Problem is, it's on the Nintendo Switch Online service for the Switch 2. A title I very well do not have. Just, still have a Switch 1. I do not yet have a Switch 2 yet, so... I mean, it's something I'm working towards getting. And, until then, I have no way to play GameCube games on the Switch. Which sucks! Because again, some of my favorite games that I enjoy on the GameCube are on the emulator, are already on the Switch Online service for the Switch 2. And it's not just Path of Radiance, but of course, XD Gale of Darkness and Wind Waker. I mean, heck, even games that I want to try for the first time, like Luigi's Mansion or Chibi Robo or even Soul Calibur 2, are on the Switch Online service for the GameCube, which I can't access because I don't have a Switch 2. But, but my gripes with not having a Switch 2 aside, what do I think of Path of Radiance? Well, if I had to say it, I was blown away. And keep in mind, when I first played through Fire Emblem, I played through the ones on the GBA, so... And following that with the 3DS titles, I thought it was it was a specific style. But when I played through Path of Radiance on my phone emulator, I was surprised to see that we actually got to see like human models of each of the characters. And even with that, it's an amazing idea altogether, as they're all just, as basically it's a overworld style we wouldn't exactly see until Three Houses on the Switch. And honestly, many of those battles and the animations in the games are so amazing. And even with that, Path of Radiance has some amazing characters, which when you compare with the entire story of the game and the many different subject matter within it, like the matter of racism or classism, like racism between Bayork and Laguz, or the classism between between the rich and the poor, and many efforts of political intrigue. And I've kind of enjoyed them fully. And it kind of allowed me to enjoy them to the fullest. And keep in mind, when a game or a piece of media kind of makes me think, I tend to enjoy them all that much. I mean, that's the reason I like shows like CSI Crime Scene Investigation or Castle or the Law and Order franchise, especially SVU. Because more often than not, many of the episodes of those series make me think. Also, with Law and Order SVU, it also doesn't hurt with the fact that for a while, I basically had no cable, like no digital cable, so the only way to watch TV was through the rabbit ears, so yeah. But I mostly ended up watching a lot of things like Ion or Cubo, which allowed me to watch a lot of shows like Monk, Cold Case, Law and Order SVU, of course, Law and Order SVU, Criminal Minds, and even old cartoons like He-Man, Brave Star, and things, even shows I remembered like The Busy World of Richard Scarry, which, yeah, says a lot. That being said, oh boy, if I had to choose even with that, a lot of the characters really tended to stand out for their roles in the story and the lore implications alone. I mean, Ike's one of the most notable and fan favorite lords for a reason, which I can understand why that's the case, because he's not royalty. He's basically just a normal guy who ended up leading an army that was leading a band of mercenaries that eventually becomes a full-on army after getting the reins passed down to him by his father. You have Soren, who is basically a branded and is more or less solid autistic representation due to how blunt he can be, as well as his backstory. You have a character like Alincia who is basically almost assassinated by Dayan forces, but is eventually saved by the Gryle mercenaries, and she helps out any way she can as they try to get her back to Crimea, as well as taking back Crimea from Dayan forces. Only joining the fight near the end. And heck, even in Radiant Dawn, we get to see her just coming into her own. You have many of the Laguz characters who are some of my favorites in the game. And like Rayson, who basically has a chip on his shoulder for Bayork after believing that they not only burned down the Serenus Forest, but they killed his people, only to basically only to basically start to have his hatred slowly subside after he learns that Ike has been protecting his sister Leanne and from Oliver and his forces. And speaking of which, Leanne's one of my favorites because she's just so darn adorable. Then there's Naysala, who in his first appearance when he lands after shifting from his full Raven form, and the first thing he does is just slicking back his hair. The first thing that came to my mind is, oh, this dude is as grimy as he comes. And yeah, he looks like he's a grimy and sleazy con artist. But in this case, the fact that he plays all sides is he has a reason. And again, Radiant Dawn goes further with that, especially when the blood pact, the idea of the blood pact comes to mind. And then there's Leaf. Again, one of my favorite cats she is one of my favorite cats in video games. And naturally, she's one of my favorite cat lagoos. Because again, and she's fairly snarky and full of herself, but more often than not, she also has a distrust towards Beork. Something that even leads her to clash at odds with Jill, who again believes that that Beork are superior to lagoos because that's what she was taught. And yeah, Jill is one of my favorites for that same reason. Because again, there is an entire support where they both learn about each other, and they learn to put aside their racist attitudes to work together, or to kind of bring an understanding between both Beork and lagoos. And what's even more noticeable, and yeah, and that's not just the tip of the iceberg, as there are a lot of other characters I enjoy that aren't lore specific to the story, but are enjoyable for the most part. I mean, you got Mist, Rolf, Marcia, Gatry, Boyd, Astrid, Tormod, Soth, Nephany, Har. Not Makalov, though. Seriously. Definitely not Makalov. But even with that, Path of Radiance is one of the few games that I definitely enjoy. And if I had to say it, if you want to play a game for the first time, while Three Houses and Awakening are solid starts, Path of Radiance is a game that is very friendly to beginners, and especially with the bonus EXP system, and it's really fun to say the least. And yes, I've said to say the least for a while. It's just something. It's just my phrase of choice. Moving on next at number 3, we have Fire Emblem Blazing Sword. Oh yeah! That's right. as I've always said, you never forget your first. And surprisingly enough, that's pretty much true here, as Fire Emblem Blazing Sword was the very first game that ever introduced me to Fire Emblem as a whole. And naturally, I was first introduced to it on the bus all the way back when I was in like 9th grade. As one of my classmates had a Game Boy Advance and a copy of Fire Emblem Blazing Sword. And it piqued my curiosity, and of course, he let me play it. And I learned to play it for the first time, and I enjoyed it. Granted, I again wasn't that good. I might have accidentally gotten Florina killed. But even with that, I was still fully interested. Like, the Fire Emblem bug had got me. And even with that, I spent so many times, whenever I got a chance to play through Fire Emblem Blazing Sword, I played through it. And heck, even watching Let's Plays of Blazing Sword, which I believe the only Let's Play of Blazing Sword I ever watched was from the Green Scorpion and Comic Foil. But even with that, Blazing Sword, and, well, although now I have watched Let's Plays from Blazing Knight and Zerk Monster Hunter, but even with that, this game is still amazing, and each time I've played it, I've gotten even better. And I've used that knowledge and my knowledge of Blazing Sword have evolved every time I played through the game. And heck, this even resulted to me playing through the game on the Switch Online service for an Iron Man playthrough, and I basically used that effort to try and play through this to the best of my knowledge. And I ended up relatively deathless for the first time. Granted, I eventually ended up losing Lucius, courtesy of a Berserk staff using Shaman. Seriously, just, yeah. Be careful of ranges, and the ranges of these guys, because you will get screwed over very quickly. But even with that, I enjoyed it so much that soon afterwards, I eventually tried my best, and I decided to try another challenge by playing through Fire Emblem Blazing Sword as Hana from Fire Emblem Fates. And keep in mind, this is because Hana's birthday is March 28th. A day before mine, so yeah, it was kind of crazy, but it was also fitting my birthday month aspect, so there's that. But even with that, honestly, every time I play through Blazing Sword, I tend to enjoy it so much. And honestly, it's kind of one of those that I never want to get where involving memories I've played that I never want to get rid of for anything in the world. That much is true. Alright. Moving on next at number 2, we have Fire Emblem Awakening. Speaking of firsts, yeah, Fire Emblem Awakening has its own first. As, again, while Blazing Sword was the first game that ever introduced me to the Fire Emblem franchise, Awakening was the first ever game that I ever physically owned. Like, in all fairness, if anything, Fire Emblem Awakening was the first game I ever owned. Yeah, I still have my physical copy and the physical box. Which is, yeah, ignore the sticker. This was from GameStop. But, yeah, I still have it to this day. And even with that, it's fair to say Awakening has a hold on me so much. Not only did it introduce me to the concept of the Avatar character, yeah, Robin was my first, granted, while Mark is kind of the first Avatar when you think about it, Robin is the first ever playable Avatar. But even with that, Awakening is still kind of a fun game that even with that, I've played so many times. And I've had so many stories within the games that, honestly, it's kind of an interesting one. Granted, it was also my first experimentation with shipping. And, it also allowed me that maybe when it comes down to it, I may have a bit of rigidity when it comes to my pairings. I mean, for a good amount of points, whenever I played through as male Robin, I always paired him with Lissa. And what's even more surprising is that I always paired Chrom with Sumia because it was canon. Yeah, I didn't branch out with Chrom's pairings until my recent Iron Man playthrough of Awakening, where I decided, nope, I'm gonna pair Chrom with Olivia. And even I was surprised when it happened. But yeah, even with all that, I enjoyed every bit of it. From the animations to the to the fact that each character has not only a critical quote, but a critical cut in animation, to even the cast of characters themselves. And heck, as much as DLC has it, Spot Pass is one of my favorite. I really enjoyed the Spot Pass system because because that means I can recruit characters from past Fire Emblem entries to help me fight. And honestly, it's kind of an interesting effort nonetheless. Granted, while I haven't finished my Awakening Iron Man playthrough, yeah, I really enjoy it. And I think it kind of leads me into my number one entry. That being said, or speaking of which, number one is Fire Emblem Fates. Yeah. If you hadn't already guessed, my number one favorite Fire Emblem game has a first of its own. As Fire Emblem Fates was the first time I discovered was the first time I realized that Fire Emblem was one of my autistic special interests. Granted, for most people that don't know, I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome when I was 13. specifically, it was like I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome all the way back in December in seventh, all the way back in 7th grade during December. And it was kind of during a moment where I got so upset about not being able to go on a school chorus trip that I almost hurt myself. And yeah, honestly, this led me to getting an autism, getting a diagnosis with a psychiatrist, and thus it led me to getting diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. And ever since then, I've been trying to live my life as a normal person while still trying to deal with myself having Asperger's, or autism in this case. And yeah, it was a rocky road, as there was still a lot of aspects of myself as an autistic individual that I never noticed was going on. And I'm still learning about that. But yeah, when it comes down to it, I also realized that during like middle school and high school, that I talked about Pokemon a lot. And that being said, and considering how this was back during Gen 3, yeah, I didn't realize that Pokemon was an autistic special interest. Or I didn't know it was an autistic special interest. I just knew I loved Pokemon a lot. But fast forward to Fire Emblem Fates. And when I started playing through the game, yeah. I mean, I started with Birthright, and I really enjoyed it. To the point that I decided, why not play through the other Fire Emblem entries? So, this led me to eventually get Fire Emblem Fates Conquest, and then Revelation. And I love all 3 entries. From the Japanese-inspired region of Hoshido to the dark and almost gothic area of Nor, and even in Revelations, which brings both kingdoms together in one joint army, as well as bringing an entire new story involving the kingdom of Vala. And I found myself enjoying it a lot. To the point that, more often than not, when I mentioned that my favorite part of Fate, my favorite Fire Emblem game is Fates, I always had to mention Revelation, because that was the game, because that was the pathway I played a lot. And in reality, I just realized maybe Fire Emblem has become a autistic special interest of mine as well. And yeah, ever since then, I knew Pokemon and Fire Emblem. I knew that this was the moment that allowed me to look into special interests as a whole, but kind of gets me interested in autistic special interests, as well as learning about other people's autistic special interests. And that's not for nothing. Fire Emblem Fates is just one of the more amazing titles with some amazing characters, some awesome music. I love the Gen 2, the Fates kids I really like, even though the Deep Realms may have kind of missed the mark, but they're still amazing even with that fact. And even with that, it was thanks to Fates that got me interested in fan fiction. In fact, most of the Fire Emblem fan fiction I read are Fates fan fiction. And specifically modern AU Fates fan fiction. Granted, it's been one of the games I've played not only the longest, but the most out of every Fire Emblem game on this list. But it allowed into so much understanding of myself and what I'm going through that honestly, I can't think of a better game to take the top spot. Just thank you, Fire Emblem Fates, for allowing me to know more about myself and who I am as a person. Just thank you. That is my top 10 favorite Fire Emblem games. Like, comment, subscribe, and if you want to, if you have the money, join my Patreon at patreon.com/theautisticscyther. Even if you don't have enough money to pay for a tier, you can join my Patreon for free. It's right there. I don't want anyone to destroy themselves financially over supporting me. I'm still happy even if you join for free. Oh my god. I'm starting to become emotional. See you next time. I'll see you next time as we take on some of my favorite tropes in video games. See you then.